Good day, I am Mary J. Buhain, and together with Angeline Planes, we are going to discuss Chapter 4 of the Intermediate Accounting 2 by Valix et al. So, specifically, we are going to discuss provision and contingent liability. So, the technical knowledge, the knowledge that we have to learn from this discussion is first, the nature and purpose of the provision. Second, the recognition of provisions, wherein we have to know the conditions for the recognition of a provision. Third is the measurement of provision, wherein we have to know and understand the measurement of a provision or how we measure a provision. Fourth and lastly is the recognition of contingent assets and contingent liability. So we have to learn the requirements for the recognition of contingent liability and contingent asset. Let us first define provision. So, it is said in the book that a provision is an existing liability of uncertain timing or uncertain amount. So, let us remember that uncertainty is what differentiates provision from other liabilities. So, let us have some examples. First one, the case one. We know the specific amount of the liability. We also know who the payee is. However, we don't know the exact timing or the due date on when we can pay for that liability. More specifically, let's say I have a liability of 500,000 pesos, and then I have to pay that to Mr. Lee. So that is the payee. However, I don't know the due date. So that is the case of uncertain timing. Second case, case 2, I know the timing, like let's say November 5, 2022. And I also know who the payee is. Let's say again, Mr. Lee. So I will pay Mr. Lee on November 5, 2022. However, I don't know the exact amount of my liability. So that is the case of uncertain amount. So those two cases are the most common cases of a provision. However, on this third case that I'm going to mention, it is the not so common case of provision, wherein, let's say, I know the timing and I also know the amount. Let's say I will pay 500,000 pesos on November 5. However, I don't know who the payee is. So that is the third case of a provision. So it is also mentioned in the book that a provision is an equivalent of an estimated liability or accrued loss contingency because of their probability and measurability. So in the following slides, we will better understand what probability and measurability are. So these are the three recognition criteria for a provision. The first one is the present obligation. So the entity has a present obligation, legal or constructive, as a result of a past event. Second is the outflow of economic benefits. So it is probable that an outflow of resources embodying economic benefits would be required to settle the obligation. Third, a provision is measured reliably. So the amount of the obligation can be measured reliably. So in the following slides, again, we will elaborate these three recognition criteria of a provision. But first, we have to learn and understand what an obligating event is. So this obligating event, it arises from past events. So those past events are the past transactions of an entity which eventually created liabilities or obligating events, wherein the entity has no realistic alternative but to settle the obligation or the liability. So because of those obligating events, the present obligations are created. So there are two kinds of present obligation. First one is the legal obligation, and then the second one is the constructive obligation. So this legal obligation, it arises from a contract, legislation, or other operation of law. So it is what we have learned from the law on obligation and contracts, wherein in Article 1156 it defined the obligation, which means that an obligation is a juridical necessity to give, to do, or not to do. So, in a sense, an entity has the duty to do something or not to do something because of what is written on the contract or what is written under legislation or law. And then in the case of constructive obligation, it exists when an entity has a stated policy that created a valid expectation that it will create or it will accept certain responsibilities from an established pattern of practice. So an example is when an entity has a stated policy that they will cover all of the expenses of a customer who receive defective products. So that customer has a valid expectation to that entity because that entity has a stated policy that they will cover all of the loss of that customer from the defective products that they delivered. And then the second recognition criteria is the probable outflow of economic benefits. So let us first understand what probable means and how it differs from possible and remote. So probable means that it is more than 50% likely or substantially more. So it is more likely than not to occur. Where impossible means 50% or less likely to occur, and the remote means 10% or less likely to occur or very slight occurrence. And then the third recognition criteria is the reliable estimate or measured reliably. So the standard is to use a range of possible outcomes to make an estimate of the obligation that is sufficiently reliable. Excuse me. So, in measuring a provision, we have to use the best measurement in order for us to get the best estimate. And we also have to remember that if there is no reliable estimate, then there is also no recognized liability. So how do we measure a provision? So our general rule is to get the best estimate. So what is the best estimate? It is the amount that the entity would rationally pay to settle the obligation. So there are three. First measurement is the midpoint. So we will get the midpoint if there is a continuous range, and we will get the individual most likely outcome if there is a single obligation. And then third and lastly is the way that we will get the weighted all possible outcomes or expected value if it involves a large population of items. So in the following slides, we will have some examples regarding the expected value in order for us to better visualize it and understand the measurement that is mentioned here. So sample problems, we have two. So the first one, illustration 1, we will use the expected value method or the weighted possible outcomes. So you can pause the video and try to answer this problem, but I will now proceed on reading the problem. An entity sells goods with a warranty under which customers are covered for the cost of repairs of any manufacturing defects that become apparent within 6 months after purchase. If minor defects are detected in all products sold, repair costs would be about 1 million pesos. If major defects are detected in all products sold, repair costs of 5 million pesos would result. The entity's past experience and future expectations indicate that 75% of the goods sold will have no defects, 20% will have minor defects and 5% will have major defects. So in the following slides, we will show the computation for this problem. So the expected value or cost of repairs is measured by weighing all possible outcomes by their associated possibilities. So we will first get the 75% sales. It is written here that there is none because in the following slides, it is said that the 75% of the goods sold will have no defects. So it is equivalent to 0 or none. And then, second is we will get the 20% sales, wherein it is mentioned in the problem that the 20% will have minor defects. And the minor defects is expected to be about 1 million pesos. So, in this computation, the 20% is multiplied to 1 million pesos in order for us to get the minor defects, the value of the minor defects, which is about 200,000 pesos. And then the 5% sales, which is the major defects. So in the problem, it is mentioned that 5% will have major defects and the value or repair costs of the 5% major defects is 5 million pesos. So we multiplied again the 5% to the 5 million pesos and we got 250,000 pesos. So the total expected value or cost of repairs is 450,000 pesos because we added the 200,000 pesos and 250,000 pesos. So next example. Illustration 2. Again, you can pause the video and try answering this problem on your own. And I will now proceed on reading this problem. An entity is a defendant in court in a patent infringement suit. The lawyers believe that there is a 60% chance that the court will not dismiss the case and the entity will not will incur an outflow of future economic benefits. If court rules against the entity and in favor of the claimant, the lawyers believe that there is a 30% chance the entity will be required to pay damages of 4 million pesos and 70% chance that the damages will be 2 million pesos. A 10% risk adjustment factor to the probabilities of the expected cash flows is considered appropriate to reflect the uncertainties in the cash flow estimate. So let us proceed on the next slide where the computation is presented. So we will get the weighted probabilities here. First is to get the 30% multiplied by the 4 million and multiplied again by 60%. So let's go back to the given problem. It is said there that there is 30% chance the entity will be required to pay damages. So that is where we got the 30%. And then 4 million is the value of that damages. And then the 60% is the 60% chance that the court will not dismiss the case. So we got 30% chance of paying for the damages and then 4,000 or 4 million, which is the value of the expected value of the damages, and then 60% chance that the court will dismiss the case or will not dismiss the case. So if you multiply all of those given amounts, you will get 720,000 pesos. And then on the next one is the 70% chance that the damages will be 2 million pesos. So we again multiply the 70% to the given value of 2 million pesos and then multiply it again to the 60% chance that the court will not dismiss the case. So we got 840,000 pesos. So we added that those two amounts, and we got the expected cash flow of 1,560,000 pesos. And however, since there is a given 10% risk adjustment factor here in the problem, we have to multiply the expected cash flow to the 10% risk adjustment factor. So we got 150,000 pesos for the risk adjustment factor. And it increased the estimated amount of provision since we added that risk adjustment factor to the expected cash outflow. So we got 1,716,000 pesos for the estimated amount of provision. So there are also other ways or other measurement considerations in measuring a provision. First one is the risk and uncertainties. So in the risk and uncertainties, the risk adjustments may increase the amount of liability and uncertainty, which needs caution in making judgment. So in the given problem earlier, if you notice that the estimated amount of provision increased because of the risk adjustment factor. So instead of just 1,560,000 pesos because of the risk, it increased to 1,716,000 pesos. So the second consideration is the present value of obligation. So if the time value of money is material, the amount of provision should be discounted to present value. And then third is the future events. So events that have sufficient evidence to incur or to occur which affects the amount needed to settle an obligation. Fourth, expected disposal of assets. So gains shall not be taken into account in measuring a provision. Fifth, reimbursements. The reimbursements, these are treated as assets and recognized separately only when the inflow of resources is virtually certain. And then six, changes in provision. Since provision is reversed if the outflow of economic benefit is no longer probable and discounted if in case that if the carrying amount increased. Seven, use of provision. So the provision is used only for expenditure where provision was originally recognized. 8, future operating losses. Provisions are not recognized for future operating losses. Ninth and lastly is the onerous contract. So in onerous contract, present obligation shall be recognized and measured as a provision. And also, an onerous contract is a contract in which the unavoidable costs of meeting the obligation under the contract exceed the economic benefits expected to be received under it. So the unavoidable cost is greater than the economic benefits. Mas marami silang naging expenses more than the income na nakuha because of this contract. Kumbaga, in a sense, lugi si entity. And then also, unavoidable cost is equal to the least net cost of exiting from the contract. So the least net cost or least cost of exiting from the contract, it is the lower amount between the cost fulfilling the contract and then the compensation or penalty arising from failure to fulfill the contract. So that's all for the provision. The other contents of this chapter will be discussed by Angeline Planes. So thank you for listening, and I hope that you learned something about provision in this discussion. If you have any questions or clarifications, you can just message me in Facebook and I will respond as soon as I can and answer your questions or clarifications hanggang sa aking kakayanan. So thank you again and keep safe to all.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my fellow students. I am Angeline L. Planes, a reporter of Chapter 4 Provision Contingent Liability. So, MJ mentioned provisions many times. Pero ano nga ba yung mga examples ng provisions? So, una na rito ay warranty. There is a clear constructive obligation. So, when we say constructive obligation, ibig sabihin, inobliga mo yung sarili mo or yung entity na magkaroon ng obligation kahit na wala naman talaga. So, kapag sinabi naman nating warranty, saan ba natin madalas nakikita yun or naririnig? Siyempre, kapag bumibili tayo ng mga product at merong nakadikit na warranty, gaya ng appliances. Sa pagbili natin ng appliances, merong mga warranty na yan na good for 1 year. So, in that year, pwede mong ibalik yung product or yung appliances na binili mo if ever na magkaroon ng defect. At yung entity, hindi sila sigurado sa amount na magagastos nila once na i-avail mo yung product. At hindi rin sila sigurado kung kailan mo i-avail yung warranty na yon. Kaya naman, provision ang warranty dahil uncertain ang amount and uncertain din ang time. So next example is environmental contamination. Provision for environmental damage shall be made. So kapag sinabi natin contamination, meron din sa mga business na kapag nagko-conduct tayo ay hindi naiiwasan na merong naaapektuhan. Yung environment natin hindi naiiwasang maapektuhan. At kapag na-contaminate yun, hindi naman pwedeng hahayaan mo na lang na gano'n na lang yun. Kailangan, ibalik mo yun sa ayos. Kasi hindi naman magiging ganun yun kung hindi ka nag-conduct ng business. So, kailangan mong ibalik yun sa ayos or linisin mo kung ano yung na-contaminate. Kaya siya provision dahil uncertain pa, hindi pa tayo sigurado kung magkano yung amount na magagamit natin sa environmental or sa cleaning doon sa na-contaminate na environment. So, next example is decommissioning or abandonment cost. So, para mas maunawaan natin tong example na to, imagine natin na nagmimina ka. So, syempre, pag nagmimina ka, alam naman nating lahat na maapektuhan yung lupa na yun. Hindi naman pwedeng kapag after mo magmina, gaya na lang doon sa environmental contamination, sa pag-conduct mo ng business, merong naapektuhan. Dito naman, sa pagmimina, naapektuhan yung lupa. So, hindi mo rin pwedeng hayaan na lang na gano'n na lang yun. Iwanan mo na lang na gano'n na lang yun. Kasi, it is either by law or contract na ibalik mo yung sa ayos, sa original ayos yung lupa. At yung cost din na magagamit doon ay uncertain pa, gaya lang ng sa environmental contamination. Kaya naman siya isa din sa example sa provision. So, next example is court case. Alam naman natin sa mga court case, there is a present obligation. If there's a present obligation, ibig sabihin nagkaroon ng past event. And pag may present obligation dito sa court case at ikaw yung liable, ibig sabihin, alam naman natin, aware na rin tayo na may babayaran na. Ang hindi lang tayo aware, ano yung certain amount. At ang amount na yon, judge lang yung makakapag-antay, ay ang makakapagbigay. May tuturing na provision, gaya ng sa mga naunang example, hindi tayo sigurado sa amount at judge lang ang makakapag-decide ng certain amount. So, next example is guarantee. Ito yung guarantee sa mga loans. So, best example na naiisip ko sa guarantee ay sa home credit. So, sa pag-a-avail ng home credit, hindi naman pwedeng walang backup. Hindi papayag yung mga home credit nun. Kasi what if hindi mo kayang bayaran? Kunwari, ako yung nangutang. What if hindi ko na pala kayang bayaran? So, sino yung hahabulin ng home credit? Kaya, meron tayong tinatawag na guarantor. At kaya, it is part of provision dahil hindi certain yung amount na babayaran ng guarantor at hindi rin certain kung kailan ba siya magbabayad kasi hindi sigurado kung hanggang kailan kaya. For instance, ako yung may utang, kung hanggang kailan ko kaya magbayad at kung hanggang gaano kalaki yung amount na kaya ko lang bayaran. So, now we already know the example of provisions. Let's now proceed to restructuring. So, when we say restructuring, it is a program planned and controlled by management and materially changes either the scope of a business of an entity or the manner in which that business is conducted. Alam naman natin lahat na kapag sinabing restructuring, ibig sabihin may nabago na. Restructure nga ibig sabihin may inayos, may binago. At in this way, yung management, pwedeng management, naisipan nilang baguhin yung certain system. For instance, PC collection business at yung mga Avon business. Aware naman tayo sa mga ganong business, di ba? Na kung saan meron silang mga agent at sila yung nagtitinda or nagsisell on behalf of those business. Kaso, yung management ng mga ganong business, so for instance, sa PC collection business, yung management ng PC, naisip nila na parang ayoko na ng indirect selling. Magtayo na lang tayo ng mga stalls sa business or doon sa malls at doon sa mga place na kung saan maraming customers. So, in that way, magiging direct selling na sila kasi sila na mismo yung lumalapit sa customers. So, from indirect selling na kung saan merong mga agent to direct selling, masasabi natin merong restructuring kasi merong nabago. So, ano ba yung mga events that qualify as restructuring? So, first one is sale or termination of line of business. So, halimbawa, San Miguel Corporation, aware naman tayong lahat na sobrang laking corporation nun at ang dami niyang under na business, gaya ng Magnolia, Pure Foods, and yung mga beer nga. So, halimbawa lang, ayaw na ng San Miguel sa Magnolia. Ayaw niya na sa Magnolia, gusto niya nang i-terminate yun, ayaw niya nang maging under yung Magnolia sa corporation na yun. So, in that way, dahil nawala yung Magnolia under San Miguel Corporation, merong restructuring na naganap. Or kaya naman, kung hindi na-terminate, ay binanta nila. So, kapag binanta nila, ibig sabihin, mawawala na din under them. Restructuring pa rin, kasi may nabago. So, the next event that qualify as restructuring is closure or relocation of business location or activities. So, when we say closure, ibig sabihin, for instance ako, meron akong main branch sa Dangwa and meron akong branch sa Tagaytay na flower shops. So, pag sinabi nating flower shop, syempre, kailangan maraming customers para magkaroon tayo ng benta, di ba? Kaso, doon sa Tagaytay, konti lang yung nabili, konti lang yung mga sales ko. At mas lugi pa ako. So, naisipan ko na lang na i-close na lang yung branch na yun. At in that way, merong restructuring na naganap kasi nasarado ko na yung branch na yun. Another example is yung relocation of business. So, for instance naman, baliktarin natin. Ang main branch ko naman ay sa Tagaytay. Flower shop pa rin tayo. Sa Tagaytay naman yung main branch ko. At konti nga lang yung mga nabili, diba? Hindi rin masyadong maganda yung bloom ng flowers ko. So, naisip ko, i-relocate na lang natin yung business natin. Ilagay na lang natin sa Dangwa at doon na lang tayo magtinda na kung saan mas maraming customers. So, in that way, meron ding restructuring na naganap dahil may relocation from Tagaytay to Dangwa. So, next example is change in management structure or making all the functional units autonomous. So, diba sa organization chart ng corporation, merong president, manager, or supervisor. Tapos, meron ding team leader. Then, biglang naisip ng management na tanggalin na lang kaya natin yung supervisor at idiretso na lang natin sa manager lahat ng reports ng team leader. So, in that way, merong naganap na restructuring kasi tinanggal natin or binago natin yung management structure. Another example naman is all the functional units autonomous. So, when we say all the functional units autonomous, lahat ng departments, for instance, bawat isa sa kanila, bawat department ay they will function na independently. Hindi na sila magde-depend sa ibang department. So, lahat autonomous na. So, next event is fundamental reorganization of an entity. So, best example nito is yung partnership. So, partnership yung organization talaga natin. Then, biglang naisip ng mga partners na baguhin na natin. Mas maganda kung maging corporation na lang tayo. So, naging corporation sila. So, in that way, meron naging restructuring from partnership to corporations. Alam na natin yung definition ng restructuring and mga events that qualify as restructuring. Pero nasa na nga ba doon yung provision for restructuring? So when we say provision for restructuring, obligation arises from the decision of restructure. So ibig sabihin, hindi naman magkakaroon ng constructive obligation nga kung wala namang restructure, na kung saan yung mga entity na naapektuhan, yung mga employees or yung mga third party na naapektuhan sa restructure ay nag-expect ng fulfillment ng obligation na iyon. So ano ba yung mga conditions na dapat present para masabi natin merong constructive obligation? So una na dito ay ang detailed formal plan. Sa restructuring, hindi pwedeng basta-basta mo na lang sasabihin na babaguhin ko to, tatanggalin ko to, i-relocate ko to, ipapasarado ko to, or kaya naman aalisin ko to sa management. Dahil sa restructuring, nagkakaroon tayo ng liability. At doon dapat sa detailed formal plan natin, kasama, first, the business being restructures. Kailangan merong changes sa business, may nangyaring restructuring. Kasi kung wala nga namang restructuring, di ba, gaya ng sinabi ko kanina, walang constructive obligation. So, dapat indicated yon sa plan nito. So, second ay principal location affected. So, ano yung location na maaapektuhan sa restructuring na yon? Third one, location, function, number of employees who will be compensated. Sino-sino yung mga employees na maaapektuhan dito sa restructuring nito? Fourth one, date when the plan will be undertaken. Gaya nga ng sabi ko kanina, hindi pwedeng basta-basta mo lang gagawin yung restructuring. Kailangan planado. So, kailangan merong specific date kung kailan mo sisimulan yung restructuring. And the fifth is the expenditures that will be undertaken. Ano ba yung mga gastos na magagamit natin sa restructuring? The second condition is entity raised valid expectations to the affected, announcing main features to those affected by it. So, dapat yung mga maaapektuhan, may expectation sila. Ibig sabihin, pwedeng nasabihan na natin sila, pwede naman by sending letters doon sa mga suppliers, workers na apektado nga ng restructuring. So, paano naman sa amount? Doon sa amount of restructuring provision. Ang kasama lang sa amount ng restructuring provision ay yung direct expenditures. Kung sinabi natin direct expenditures, these are the necessarily incurred in connection with restructuring. Hindi naman kasi pwedeng isama mo doon sa amount yung hindi naman talaga directly part ng restructuring. So, ang mga example na to is yung salaries and benefits to be incurred after operating cease and associated with the closure of the operations. So, yung sa mga employees nga na affected, di ba? Meron mga employees na affected. Then, yung mga salaries na ibabayad natin sa kanila, yun yung part ng amount of restructuring provision. So, ano ba yung mga expenditures that are excluded? Una na dito is cost of retraining continuing staff. Bakit hindi siya kasama? Kasi continuing staff siya. Kailangan mo talagang i-retrain yun kasi mapupunta sila sa ibang location. So, kailangan nilang ma-adapt, kailangan nilang ma-heads up kung paano ba yung galawan doon sa location na yon. So, ititrain mo sila, i-retrain mo sila kasi continuing staff sila sa ibang location ng business. Next naman is marketing and advertising program for the promotion of new company image. Obviously, it is an ongoing business. Therefore, hindi siya restructuring provision because future yung magiging effect nito dahil ina-advertise mo nga yung company image, yung bagong company image mo. So, the third one is the investment in new system and distribution network. Since bago na nga yung business nyo or meron niyang nangyaring restructuring, kailangan ng mga investment. So, ibig sabihin, hindi yun part ng expenditure sa restructuring provision. We're we're done with provisions, and now let's go to the second part of this chapter, which is the contingent liability. So when we say contingent liability, it is a possible obligation that arises from past event and whose existence will be confirmed only by the occurrence or non-occurrence of one or more uncertain future events not wholly within the control of the entity. So yung contingent liability, halos same lang siya ng provision in a way that they both have a what we call uncertainty. Walang kasiguraduhan. So para mas maintindihan natin, i-differentiate natin yung contingent liability and provision. So maituturing or it will be considered contingent liability if the present obligation is either probable or measurable but not both. So pwedeng probable pero hindi measurable, pwede namang measurable pero hindi probable, o kaya naman possible, ganon. So, sa provision naman, it will be considered provision if the present obligation is both probable and measurable. So now let's define first the contingent asset. When we say contingent asset, a possible asset that arises from past event and whose existence will be confirmed only by the occurrence or non-occurrence of one or more uncertain future events not wholly within the control of the entity. So kung mapapansin nyo, halos same lang siya ng definition ng contingent liability. Ang kinaibahan lang, yung sa contingent liability, it is a possible obligation. Sa contingent asset is a possible asset nga. Wherein, mako-confirm nga lang yung existence niya by the occurrence or non-occurrence of the future events. So, before we continue sa treatment ng contingent liability and contingent asset, i-define muna natin yung 6 terms na makikita natin dito sa gilid na to. So, ang una dito ay ang certain. When we say certain, it is 100% na mafulfill or ibig sabihin may kasiguraduhan. Next term is virtually certain. When we say virtually certain naman, may malaking possibility and at kung ipa-percentage naman natin siya ay it ranges from 90% to 95%. Next term is probable. So, more than 50%. So, sa probable, it is more than 50% or kaya naman it is likely to occur. Kung ikukumpara natin siya sa virtually certain, mas sigurado ka doon sa virtually certain, pero sa probable naman, more than 50%. So, sigurado ka pa rin. Hindi nga lang siguradong sigurado na gaya ng virtually certain. Next naman ay possible. So, sa possible is 50% or less likely to occur. Next naman is remote. 10% lang yung likely to occur niya. Next naman ay impossible. So, impossible, 0%. Imposible talaga. So, eto na nga, yung treatment ng contingent liability and contingent asset. Dito sa contingent liability, kapag certain, nire-recognize parehas pati sa contingent asset. So, sa virtually certain, then, parehas lang sa certain na recognize at recognize din sa contingent asset. So, sa probable naman, more than 50%. Sa contingent liability, it is recognized already, pero sa contingent asset ay hindi pa nire-recognize, dinidisclose pa lang. So, when we, alam naman aware naman ata tayong lahat pag sinabing disclosure, na kung saan makikita natin yon sa note sa financial statements. Sa possible naman under ng contingent liability, dinidisclose natin siya. Sa contingent asset naman ay ini-ignore. Ibig sabihin, hindi natin dinidisclose. Walang disclosure na nagaganap. Hinahayaan lang natin siya. Ignore nga eh. So, sa remote naman, 10% yung possibility. So, ignore na rin natin sa contingent liability and contingent asset. Sa impossible, since impossible nga siya, then ignore na. Ignore na rin sa contingent liability and contingent asset. So, ano naman yung mga required disclosure na kailangan sa contingent liability? These are, first, brief description of the nature of the contingent liability. So, bakit ba merong liability? Bakit nagkaroon ng liability? And ano yung nature na yun? Second one is an estimate of its financial effects. So, ano yung possible amount na magiging affected? The third one is an indication of the uncertainties that exist. So, ano yung mga dahilan, yung mga signs na nag-e-exist itong mga uncertainties nito? Na the fourth one is the possibility of any reimbursement. Hindi tayo sure, pero malay natin, magkaroon tayo ng mga other party na magbabayad on behalf of us. So, kailangan ma-disclose natin yon, yung possibility na yon ng reimbursement. So, ang required disclosure naman sa contingent asset ay dalawa lang. Yung brief description of the nature of the contingent asset. So, yung nature din ng asset or kung bakit may asset. And the second one is an estimate of its financial effects. So, we're done with contingent liability and contingent assets. So, now let's go to the last subtopic, which is the decommissioning liability. When we say decommissioning liability, it is an obligation to dismantle, to remove, and to restore an item of property, plant, and equipment as required by law or contract. It is also known as asset retirement obligation at recognized at present value. So, para mas maintindihan natin, let's imagine na bumili tayo ng PPE. So, sa pagbili natin ng PPE, for instance, yung machine, di ba sa machine na binili natin, kailangan nating i-install yon. So, yung mga maaapektuhan sa pag-install natin ng PPE, yun yung kailangan nating i-restore. At yun yung liable tayo na kailangan nating gawin after retirement ng isang PPE. Kaya nga siya tinawag na asset retirement obligation. So, kailangan nating ibalik kung ano yung original form, original structure ng place kung saan mo in-install yung PPE. So, in this part kasi, hindi naman kasi tayo magkakaroon ng liability or ng decommissioning liability kung wala tayong in-acquire na PPE. So, paano nga ba? Ano nga ba yung measurement ng PPE? So, meron tayong tatlo dito. First one is the purchase price. Second one is the directly attributable cost. And the third one is the estimated cost of dismantling. So, sa estimated cost of dismantling, ito yung amount na ginagastos or gagastosan sa sa pag-restore ng naapektuhan na place or structures nung nag-install tayo ng PPE. At para mas maintindihan pa natin lalo, let's take a look on this illustration.
Pause the video discussion to read the problem.
So, for the journal entries, so sa January 1, i-debit natin yung drilling platform, yung PPE, which is yung drilling platform in this illustration. So, 26,610,000. Dahil yung cash niya, yung amount ng drilling platform is 25 million and yung decommissioning liability is 1,610,000. So, yung total cost ng drilling platform is 26,610,000. And for the explanation, to record acquisition of the drilling platform with present value of decommissioning liability. So, sa December 1 naman, sa depreciation, i-debit natin yon for 2,661,000 and credit accumulated depreciation for 2,661,000 and to record depreciation. So, December 31 also, i-record naman natin yung discount rate na 12%. So, i-debit natin yung interest expense na 193,200 and yung decommissioning liability na i-credit natin for 193,200 din. For the explanation, to record 12% discount rate. So, for 2022 journal entries, December 31, another depreciation naman. So, debit depreciation, 2,661,000 and accumulated depreciation, 2,661,000. Explanation to record depreciation. Dito naman is i-record ulit natin yung 12% discount rate. So, i-debit natin yung interest expense for 216,384 and the commissioning liability for 216,384. So, paano naman nakuha yung 216,384? So, kung naaalala nyo nga kanina, meron tayong na-compute na discount rate or yung sa decommissioning liability pala na 1,610,000. Hindi pala yun natin na-compute. Given pala yun na decommissioning liability nung January 1, 2021. So, 1,610,000. And then, i-add natin doon yung interest expense na na-compute natin. Ito yung sinasabi ko kanina. Dito pala tayo nag-compute na 193,200. Ipag-a-add natin yan para malaman natin kung ano yung carrying amount na kung saan dapat natin i-multiply yung 12,000. So, 1,610,000 plus 193,200 is equal to 1,803,200. Diyan natin i-multiply yung discount rate na 12% kaya nagkaroon ng 216,384. So, for the settlement of the commissioning liability, on December 31, 2029, after 10 years, so 10 years na, ibig sabihin, tapos na yung useful life ng PPE or ng drilling platform. The entity contracted with another entity to dismantle and remove the drilling platform for 5,500,000. Ang journal entry natin dyan is debit decommissioning liability na 5 million. Kasi originally, 5 million lang talaga yung estimated amount nila as indicated sa problem natin na nakalagay doon sa preceding slides. So, meron tayong loss na i-debit din for 500,000. Yun yung loss on settlement of decommissioning liability. And for the explanation, the record settlement of decommissioning liability. So, to record the recognized of carrying amount of drilling platform, meron tayong debit na accumulated depreciation of 26,610 million, 26,610,000 and drilling platform credit na 26,610,000. So, ibig sabihin, fully depreciated na yung drilling platform. I-recognize na natin yung drilling platform. So, now let's go to the change of decommissioning liability. So, kung magkakaroon man ng change sa decommissioning liability at decrease siya, ang effect nun ay ide-deduct natin from the cost of the asset. Pero kung increase naman yung naging change niya sa liability, then it is added from the cost of asset. So, para mas maintindihan natin itong change of decommissioning liability, here's an illustration.
Please pause the video to read the problem.
So, for the journal entries, January 1, we have debit decommissioning liability for 800,000, credit plant asset 800,000. It is to record the decrease of decommissioning liability. So, December 31, meron ng depreciation. So, we have debit depreciation for 2,661,000. Credit accumulated depreciation for 2,661,000 and it is to record the depreciation. So, paano ba natin nakuha yung 2,661,000? So, as stated sa problem, the cost of plant is 12 million. The reduction of the commissioning liability is 800,000. That's why we have the net cost of 11,200. 11,200,000. So, bakit nga natin ulit nireduct or dineduct yung decommissioning liability? Dahil merong decreased. So, from net cost, kailangan natin i-deduct yung accumulated depreciation na 4 million. And now, we have a carrying amount of 7,200,000. At dyan natin i-divide yung 20 years na useful life na lang ng plant dahil nga noong January 1, 2020 ay 10 years old na ito. So, 20 years na yung naging basis ng useful life. So, next entries, December 31 pa rin, kailangan naman nating i-record yung 6% discount rate. So, we have debit interest expense for 59,400 and credit decommissioning liability for 59,900. So, paano naman to? Paano naman yung 59,400? So, may decommissioning liability tayo na 1,790,000. And then, i-deduct pa din natin dito yung 800,000 na decreased sa decommissioning liability. So, we have a carrying amount or adjusted carrying amount of 990,000. So, dyan naman natin i-multiply yung 6% and we got 59,400. So, before we end our discussion, don't forget to never give up because great things take time. Thank you for listening. I hope you learned something.